Hi, everyone. This is the Next Step Programs bringing to you a webinar on transition, a brief overview of what transition looks like through the lifespan. My name is Ricky Price, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of the Next Step Programs. Currently, right now, I am in school as a PhD student for special education, focusing on that transition youth to work. I have here with me Michelle. She works with TNS as well. She's also a parent of an individual who has gone through and is going through the process and an advocate. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Ricky. This is Michelle Piseni. I am the mother of a individual who has recently graduated from school. So he is gone through the transition process in the last several years. Now we are looking at the adult side of things. I've been involved with TNS for a couple years now.
Yeah, well, we're super excited to bring this information to you all. Again, we just wanted to make the clarification that this is a brief overview. A lot of the things that we're talking about, we could spend hours, and we have spent hours between the two of us talking about all the nuances that go into the transition process. But this is to just give you a brief overview, and then hopefully you'll come back and join a lot of our webinars, join some of our other workshops that we have that go into more of the specifics and the details of a lot of the things that we're talking about, which we will allude to as well throughout our presentation. So let's get started. So what we're gonna be talking about is we're looking at a transition with a more of a focus with a parent lens. So Michelle, I think will be able to bring a lot of great aspects into this, whereas some of my input will be a little bit more from the educator side of things. We're going to look at what is transition overall from the age of 14 to graduation. We're going to talk a little bit about graduation and beyond, what that looks like, and then maybe even putting the thought into your head of why we should think about transition before the age of 14. We then have some additional resources that we want to share with you all, and that'll be it. So before we get started with all of that, if you're new to coming to one of our workshops or webinars, we are the Next Step Programs. We have been established for about 5 to 6 years now. And I started this organization with Josh, who is the other co-founder, because we had a passion on wanting to educate about the transition process because we saw that there was such a gap in education and awareness through it. So our goal is to advocate for societal change for individuals with disabilities as they transition out of high school by providing resources and support to the community. We do this through education, which you're joining us for one of our educational programs right now, through advocacy, and through inspiration. And by that, we want to inspire other community members, other employers to be able to think of different ways to include individuals with disabilities into the workforce. So the people that we serve is any individual with a disability. We also communicate with parents, with families, with teachers, employers. We have a whole section of workshops that we're putting together for employers. We also have specific workshops and educational programs for teachers or individuals and students, employees, to help them through this process. We also have programs which we will talk about later where we work one-on-one with people. Again, the focus is on educating individuals in the community about the transition process, helping to advocate for this process for individuals with disabilities, and then inspiring so we can create some more inclusion. We are here to help define individual concerns with you. So be it you're an individual with a disability, an employer, a family, or educator, each audience member is going to have a different concern that we're going to be able to help you out throughout the process. So we want to work with you to provide education and further information to guide you through that process, to make the informed decisions you need to go through that transition process. So now that you know a little bit more about TNS, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of everything. And we first want to talk about transition as a continuum. So Michelle, would you like to start us off?
Hey, I just want to tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Sam before we talk about the transition being a continuum. I just want everyone to know that the reason we talk about where we are and where are we going or where we want to be or how do we plan it and how do we get there is because one thing that I have come to learn in hindsight was that initially I was very sort of resistant to all this sort of planning and questions and having the rest of the team sort of focus on his future because it always seemed so far out. And it just didn't seem sort of realistic to me that we were looking at these things when he was 14, when I knew he wouldn't necessarily be dealing with a job or a volunteership until, maybe he was out of school. So anyway, it's every experience is obviously unique to the individual and their family. But for me, I just wanted to let everyone know that if you start thinking in terms of the future and what it might look like for yourself or your individual, then that way you can start planning and keep a binder or notes or whatever as you make your way through, because you will find that all the things that you're working on with your team and others in the community and at home will be really valuable to you when they do graduate. And I mean, again, that was just my personal experience, but that's just kind of the reason we start talking about these things now.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry.
What I was just going to say is, echoing off of what you just said, Michelle, is I think it's important to take into consideration a lot of these questions of where you are going to go, but there is going to be that hesitation because it is so far into the future, but that should be the main focus if you can make it the main focus, because it's going to help you go through that process. And those are some great tools of keeping a binder, of keeping notes, and to joining things like this to be able to help you through that process and understand the importance of it as well.
Right, I absolutely agree. And that's probably another resource we're hoping to, have for everyone is sort of a guideline of what you can do from the ages to like 14 to 21.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ricky, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the acronyms or some of the terms that we will use kind of throughout, and you will certainly be using throughout your time of transition. So I just wanted to mention that a lot of the acronyms or terms we may be using today are probably going to be specific to Pennsylvania. Some of them are general and they can, pertain to a lot of different states and a lot of different areas. But again, we're going to help with giving you some guidelines on how to figure out what those are or how they might differ from, in your state. But these are some of the more important ones, I guess. Some of the ones that might terms or things that you may be using pretty regularly. But again, there are far more terms, and if you need any help understanding what there might be, we can certainly do that for you. But probably two of the biggest ones is your IEP, which is an individualized education plan or program, depending on your area, and the ISP, which is the individualized services plan. Now, the biggest difference is you are usually working on your IEP throughout school age and until graduation. Then once they graduate, you will switch specifically over to your ISP, although depending on what your individual is involved in, they can also be working on their ISP throughout. But we can talk a little bit about that later when we look at MHID.
And I think it's important too that this is not an exhaustive list of the acronyms.
Right.
So we have let's see if clicking on this link is going to work. But these are some of the resources that you can click at the bottom to see a little bit further. But here is a list of some special education languages and different terms to help you throughout the process as well. Again, like Michelle was saying, it's very specific to state sometimes, and it can be very confusing because some of these acronyms might be very similar to other fields or in other situations. And that can be very confusing to somebody when you're like, oh, well, I thought an IEP was this, but it means something else to somebody else. So we wanted to provide this resource to you all so that you had it. And we're not going to go specifically into each single one. We're going to be talking a lot about them throughout the presentation. But if you have a little bit more, if you want some more guidance on them, please definitely contact us and we can help. So something we also thought was important to go over for a little bit as well, and this is also a link that you will get the resource to below, are certain special education laws, because it's important to know what is governing the things that should be happening in school throughout this transition process and then afterwards as well. So IDEA, which stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is the main law which encompasses that school-aged time. So it makes available a free and appropriate public education to eligible children and individuals with disabilities throughout the country to provide that special education and related services. This is where the IEP comes into play. This is where a 504 plan comes into play, if you're familiar with that. And this is what's governing throughout the time through K through 12. Now, once you graduate from that time, there are other laws that start to take effect, such as the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in employment through various state and local and government and public agencies. This is also where, if individuals need to ask for reasonable accommodations, that this is the law that's governing them to make sure that they're not being discriminated at work. And it's important to be aware of these laws and to do your research on states, because throughout the state, throughout the various states that we live in, it can also change. But it's important to note that maybe these are some of the skills that we'll talk about a little bit later that we need to start teaching, because with IDEA, parents and educators can help support the person, but with the ADA, it's the individual that has to enact a lot of the rules and regulations that are with under the law. So we just wanted to make that clarification. So now going into the nitty-gritty information, registering and intaking with your county's MHIDD office. Michelle, would you like to take this off for us?
Sure. One of the first things you need to do, and in our experience, we didn't wait. I actually registered Sam when he was quite young, but you can do it at any point in their, throughout their school age or life. And again, I just want to point out that, and I don't know if you already said this, Ricky, about the, here it's called, our county office is called MHIDD, which is, Mental Health and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Office. It may be called something different in your county or your state, but just to make you aware of that. And this is going to be a very valuable contact for you throughout your time working on the transition process, pretty much from start to finish. The first person you need to contact is the county office, and then generally a supports coordinator or a case manager, they're called sometimes, will help you with the intake, and they will get you started. Then you want to find out also where they're located, and if, with COVID and the way things are now, you may not be able to do an in-person appointment any longer, but at least you will get your appointment and get yourself on the list, and they will have someone either contact you by phone or in person or however it works. But once you locate your office and get in touch with your supports coordinator, they really are the catalyst. They are the person who will get everything started. They will tell you, what is available as far as services or supports. They will tell you what your individual is either entitled to or eligible for, and they will help you throughout the process. They will be part of your IEP meetings. They'll be part of your ISP meetings and things like that once you do graduate. But they are really with you. I mean, my son's case manager, like I said, I probably registered him there when he was very young, I think 3. But as the individual gets older, you will find that you are working more often and more sort of regularly with your sports coordinator. And like I said, they're sort of there all along, and they're a very sort of valuable resource for you and for your individual. And they will, they're very helpful in telling you or informing you of what sort of applications need to be submitted or what sort of testing may need to be done. But I just can't stress enough that they really are a key person throughout your transition.
And I think too, to echo off what you were saying as well is so I'm from Michigan, and so our MHIDD office per se would potentially be the community health department. And so that's another phrase of what it might be called. And so doing a little bit of your research as well. So if you are early on in the process, like Michelle did with her son, or a little bit later, you know the different places to go, because sometimes educators might not, or teachers might not know a lot of this information. And so it's a lot of the information that you might need to kind of seek out yourself. So after registering,
now also,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Can I just add a quick thing real quick?
Of course.
One thing we've got to cover was that the other thing is, as your son or daughter gets older, MHIDD will be the person or I guess organization that will sort of inform you of financial supports like waivers or so they, that's another reason to sort of get involved with them or sign up with them sooner than later or as soon as you can, because if there are any sort type of waiting lists or anything, again, it varies county to county, state to state. And not to be an alarmist, it's just that I think the sooner that you can get involved with them and get a support coordinator, the better off you'll be.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. So after registering, or even before registering, it's now important to kind of start this transition process. So at age 14, transition planning begins. Now, it's important to note that by law, it needs to happen by 16. There's a lot of states that have adapted the age of 14. Again, this can vary across states, so make sure you do your research. And there are even some states that are adapting a earlier age than 14 as well, around 12 or 13. So just make sure you kind of know the planning process, but it never hurts to start it earlier. But definitely around age 14 to 16 is when some of these things should start happening. So Michelle, would you like to talk about some of these stuff for us?
Yes, we can definitely want to, start to assemble your transition team. And then, that can be your doctors, teachers, therapists, educators, county people like your sports coordinator. And then you will begin to create the transition portion of your IEP. And again, this, times have changed, and this is just my personal experience. There's a lot of, I guess, survey type things that they will give you when you're creating your transition team about how you see your son or daughter at 18 or 20, or things like, do you see them living on their own? Do you see them living with you indefinitely? Are you thinking about employment for them? And that's all important because it's just sort of giving you a basis of, when you're starting your transition, of what kinds of things you're working to, throughout that 5 or 6 years when you actually kind of switch over into adulthood. And some of the things that you can look about, again, it varies from person to person and their living experience and who they're living with and what they have available. But you start to look at things like guardianship or conservatorship. Sorry, Ricky. Conservatorship. Oh, yeah. And again, these process all will vary, depending on the individual's needs. And once you sort of establish what those are, it'll be added to your formal IEP and your transition plan.
And I think that's important too. I mean, and again, just to reiterate to everyone that this is a very brief, that we could talk about guardianship, we could talk about diploma versus certificate for days and hours. And so we will have other programs put together that go specifically into these details, and you're going to get resources that talk about it a little bit more. But echoing off of what Michelle said, it is important during this time to kind of think what the next steps are so that we can include those goals into the IEP or the transition plan. So whether that be employment, so trying to figure out what skills might be needed to help that individual into employment. We were talking about laws before, so maybe some self-advocacy skills so they understand some of the accommodations that they may need potentially as a person. But maybe they're going on to secondary school, and so they need to be able to figure out what skills they need for that, or adult living and daily skills, and all these different types of things should be going into IEP to help with that transition plan and that learning. Because the goal with transition is to help the smooth transition, for a lack of better words, from school to employment or wherever they go next afterwards. And they're getting so much support within school, hopefully, that afterwards we don't want all of a sudden that to end and then them to be a fish in this open water. We want them to be able to have the same supports and be able to be efficient on their own. And so a lot of these things, talking about a diploma versus certificate, for example, there are some organizations for employment or going on to college programs that won't accept a certificate, but they will accept a diploma. And so those things need to be decided pretty early on in talking with the school team, as well as like state laws, but also guardianship and conservatorship, and what are the consequences or the benefits from either of those as well. And so it is a lot, and it can be very overwhelming. And I think this goes back to what Michelle was saying before, is just keeping a binder, keeping track of a lot of these things, asking a lot of questions, because it is a lot to think about and a lot to accept. But at the age of 14, some of these things should be going through your heads in the planning process. So kind of continuing on with that too.
Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh no, I just said absolutely, and I was just also thinking that jumping off of what you said, Ricky, is that it might seem early at 14 to be thinking about what they're going to do at 18 or 21 or as an adult, but this really is the time when you have, you know, your transition team and the support to really start thinking about, even as hard as that is, you know, what independent living might look like, you know, for your son or daughter, or what you know, supported living might look like. And like Ricky says, what employment looks like versus, you know, volunteer opportunities, or maybe even both.
Exactly. So Michelle, I know you kind of touched upon this already, but I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more. But also within this age is kind of understanding how waivers potentially work, getting on a waiting list, talking to your support coordinators about that. Also the prioritization of urgency of needs of service. And something that I know you'll stress this as well, is that throughout this presentation too, none of this is like legal advice or whatever. You can't come back and sue us, but it's definitely things to start talking about and thinking about for sure. And so I don't know, Michelle, if you want to touch upon some of these things.
Okay. Again, this information will probably vary slightly from, you know, county to county, state to state. But here in Pennsylvania, you do have to start to get an understanding of the waivers early on so that you can better understand how to, you know, what your son or daughter is best suited for, or has the greatest match to. So as I said, once you locate your local office and you get connected with a supports coordinator, excuse me, and in some places they call them case managers, and they will put you on a waiting list. And again, not everybody calls it a waiting list, but just sort of a waiting list, because as your child ages every year, things do change. I think Ricky mentioned that earlier. So, you know, you might not be eligible for one of the bigger waivers until they're a little older, but there are autism waivers that can kind of help and support you, you know, when they're a little younger. And one of the key terms is PUNS. It's the PUNS. That is, I just wanted to mention it because when you first start working with your supports coordinator, they will put this PUNS sort of form together with you and your individual or your family. And what you sort of are trying to establish where your individual's needs are at that point in time. And that will in turn put them in one of three categories. And it sounds kind of scary, but it's something like critical, emergent, or ongoing. And again, I don't want any of those labels or categories to scare you. It just gives an idea based on your son or daughter's need for supports and services at that time, how soon they will be sort of eligible for, or once a waiver should come up, where they are in, getting that. And it's just a tool that they use. It makes sense, but I found when we first started doing them, they are a little scary for parents with the verbiage they use. And again, not to be an alarmist, but sometimes it's better to have your person on the critical list or the emergent list, because that's going to get them their sort of services and supports maybe sooner than, someone else who isn't as in need. And I'm not suggesting that you exaggerate things or anything like that. I just think that, just try to be really honest and critical in your thinking. Like, maybe they have some physical needs that another person doesn't need. So it's okay to say, my son or daughter needs help getting in and out of the car or in and out of the shower. Although we would all love our kids to be, independent at certain ages with all things. It's just important to be sort of straightforward and kind of clear about your individual as you can, so that they are placed in the correct category. And then at this time, you might also want to consider some financial things, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. And you can decide for yourself if something like an ABLE account or a special needs trust is appropriate for your son or daughter around this time.
So then after the age of 14, and again, this transition planning is between the age of 14 to 16, depending on the state that you are in. Starting around age 16, some of this transition planning now starts to go into effect. And by that, we just mean a little bit more of teaching those skills, looking at some more of those post-school outcomes, things of that nature. And again, some of the things that we're going to be talking about is very Pennsylvania specific, because everything varies between the states that we're in, unfortunately, which can make this very confusing. So before Michelle, if you want to talk about age of majority, I just want to kind of give a brief overview of like what age of majority is and what it means. And then if you want to kind of talk about specifically why it's important to start thinking about that. But essentially what age of majority is all the rights that are covered by the state and federal legislation automatically transfer to that individual. So as a student with a student that has an IEP plan or program, on or before their 17th birthday, and again, that's depending on state. So in the state of Michigan, age of majority is 18. But in special education, it can be the age of 21. So again, it depends on your state. But before you turn 17, the individual or their parents must be given some information regarding some of their transfers of rights. And if this feels very uncomfortable to make decisions on their own, they can also choose an advocate to speak on their behalf to assist in some of those educational transition plans to after high school. So Michelle, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about age of majority and the importance of it.
Yeah, that was something I really didn't quite understand until Sam sort of got actually to that exact point in his life. And again, I know we keep saying it varies state to state, school to school, but in Pennsylvania, to use Sam as the example, he was in school, and they also offered what they call, it was like a summer program, but eventually they called it extended year. It eventually sort of evolved into a plan where it was like basically all school all year long. Now that, may or may not vary. And what I found was if your son or daughter would turn, 18 while they were in school, and even though in most ways they're seen as reaching the age of majority, they're still eligible to do things like Sam was, to do those. Like I said, they called them extended year, but they were the summer programs, so that he was able to stay in school, not all year because there were a lot of breaks, but throughout the calendar, I guess. Now, the other thing I want to mention, and it could change and be different in other states, but the other thing I learned was that if your son or daughter starts the new school year, whether that's August or September, if they start the new school year and they are not yet 21, they are eligible and entitled to stay the entire school year. And in some cases, they can do the extended school year or the summer school. And that's just another law that protects them. And in Sam's case, he, started school in August, and then he turned 21 in September, but he was able to complete that entire school year through June, even though he was well over 21. And I'm pretty sure that's the, right of most states.
And I think that's important too, that like even a lot of the information, I don't know, we keep saying this again, but a lot of the information, since we do have more of a Pennsylvania and a little bit of a Michigan kind of overlap, and that's some of our expertise, is that if there's something that's different to your state that you know is very different, or things are called different, definitely let us know, like after you're watching this or during the process of that you're watching it, because that can help us to inform other people as well. Things constantly change, laws are changing, acronyms are different, all that stuff. And so it is helpful for us to collaboratively work together. So 16, kind of jumping over to age 18 now, and discussing some entitlement versus eligibility issues. So there are some various things on this slide that we're going to be talking about, such as selective service or registering to vote, various adult programs, SSI and SSDI. Some things that I particularly want to focus on, and then I'll let Michelle talk about some of the other things on this slide, is starting to think about this a little bit earlier, but definitely around the age of 18, of looking at some different adult programs, supported living, if that is something that the individual is needed, trying to get experience to go to work too. Employers want to see experience. That's a huge thing. And so can they get work or volunteer or service learning experience in school? Are they going to need supportive employment? How are they going to be transported to where they're going? There are lots of organizations, the Department of Transportation per state has various rules and regulations to help assist individuals with disabilities. Sometimes it's completely free, but we need to teach some of that transportation training as well. And these are some really important things to start thinking about. Michelle, do you want to touch upon some of the other things on here?
Sure. Again, this is just my personal experience with Sam and how we went through some of these things. And I'm sure, a lot of parents may have this in common with me. I was kind of appalled that they expected me to, have Sam register with the Selective Service as soon as he turned 18 based on his, development. Sam has a lot of, I would say his challenges are more on the severe end, and he definitely would not be, a candidate for the Selective Service. However, when I was researching some of the information, the reason they say that all males must register, regardless of their individual, either their disability or where they are developmentally, it's because the Selective Service has no way of knowing, what that individual's limitations may or may not be. So they basically say by law, again, this is just what I found in Pennsylvania, that they have to register them. And then if that should ever come up, then obviously you would have to address it then. And also registering to vote. That was another thing that was somewhat unique to mine and Sam's experience, because there are a lot of individuals out there who are, capable of voting and can and should be heard. And with Sam, he is not there yet. So this was kind of a twofold thing. And I don't mean to jump forward and backwards, but when Sam turned 18, I know we talked a little bit about considering guardianship. I had to establish guardianship over Sam just because I was told as he would, get older, say, for example, he had to go to the doctor or to the emergency room. If Sam indicated in any way that he didn't, wanted to refuse services, they would have to honor that. But Sam obviously can't speak for himself or let that be known. So in other words, I would have to, make that decision for him. And then I could, as long as I had legal guardianship. But the sort of one caveat to becoming a guardianship in Sam's case was that he had to be deemed incompetent by the courts, which, again, not to be, sort of disappointing to anyone, but in Sam's case, that's what worked out for him. And so because he is considered incompetent according to the courts, he is an individual who is not allowed to vote. He wouldn't be allowed to vote anyway. So again, it's a very personal decision. It's just something to think about moving forward, that they do have to register for selective service at 18 if they're a male. And then also it's, a choice to vote or not vote, but there may be some limitations to voting depending on what their status is.
So continuing on with age 18, kind of getting to that point of graduation and aging out. So continuing to work on a lot of those partnerships, expanding that transition team to not only educators and various family members or coordinators and teachers, but maybe there are other behavioral consultants. There are county representatives, special education directors, vocational rehabilitation counselors, other employment specialists, employers themselves, therapists. Like, these are all people that should be in this transition team to help with the aging out process. There are many facets to life, as we all know, in being an adult. And so as much support we can get, then the less it has to be just on your shoulders on your own. So aging out, again, this is another state-specific thing. It depends. In Pennsylvania, correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but it's 21 years of age, you have to age out of high school. But
Yeah.
in Michigan, it's 26. And so and in some states, it might be a little bit lower or in between that number. And so that's very important to know a lot earlier than age of 18 too, to know how long and how many years you have to plan a lot of these things and to work on a lot of those skills, and potentially how that affects your certificate or diploma track, because some of those ages too could potentially affect that that aspect of receiving those things. Michelle, do you want to talk about some stuff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is, sort of the critical point where, anywhere from like 17 to 21, as we're talking about now, that's sort of the point when you're officially considering them adults. And in this, when they're really sort of making that leap from what they're doing in school and throughout, to actually adulthood or independent living, or what they're going to do post-graduation. But one thing in particular, again, it's just Pennsylvania, specific to Pennsylvania. It may be different other places. But one thing I know that Sam went through, or that we had to change, I guess, was up until he was 18, he had, in Pennsylvania, it's Gateway. It's sort of the Medicare piece of it. And he also had our private insurance that he used, for health and medical and dental and vision, et cetera. And he, once he turned 8, and so under that, excuse me, I should back up. Under that, whatever he had, like if we had an agency where the support person came in and worked with him in the home, or in his case, he needed briefs, so we had to, order briefs for toileting reasons. And there was one other one I was going to let you know. Anyway, there was a few things that Sam was in need of. And so at that age, prior to the age of 18, both his Gateway and our private insurance worked together and paid for those things. And but once they turn 18, your private insurance piece kind of goes away. It's not that it goes away completely; it just goes away in a sense that, you know, they can't continue to see their pediatrician because things like immunizations or shots, you know, those are all considered geared to a child, and now by law they're an adult. That's just one example. Another example is, you know, this may be the point where they are changing over to a waiver, and a waiver, you know, maybe has more funding to support the things they need at that point. So you won't be using their private insurance anymore for those types of things. So it's just something to think about. That's a pretty significant change because it's a little scary at first. I know I was apprehensive because I thought, oh no, you know, if he needs anything from an MRI to, you know, getting briefs delivered once a month, and everything kind of in between, it was always covered, and there was really no question or no forms to fill out or nothing to do. So that's just one thing. It does vary, like I said, with each individual, but those are just a couple things to be aware of at this point in time when they turn 18.
And I think too, with those changes, that goes back to what I was saying before, is laws change too. What governs you during school age doesn't govern you afterwards, such as IDEA, and then that transfer over to the ADA. And specifically, maybe skills like self-determination and advocacy that need to be potentially had by some of these individuals to be able to advocate for themselves in an employment world to get their needs and wants met. And so there are a lot of changes from school to out of school, and understanding those changes I think is important, because then we can work on some of those skills and work on what some of those changes might look like before they happen, and be ahead of the game, which is exactly what we want to be. Is we want to be ahead of the game as much as possible. Now, with all of this, it's the journey that we're going through, and it's a long journey at that. And I'm sure Michelle can attest to it. I'm sure it goes by with a blink of an eye, but also when you're entranced in it, it's a long process. And as you can see, there are lots of things that there are needed throughout this process. And there are lots of things that we potentially didn't really talk about as in detailed much either, and because things keep changing and things are different between district and schools and individual, everything is very individualistic per person. And so that's why it goes back to our questions that we had at the very beginning, that where are we going, how to best support these individuals, and if a step is missed, if something, it's okay. You're going to get through it. There are support systems out there. Us as an organization, we want to help support. There are other organizations that help support these processes as well. And so just trying to find those resources and as much as possible is what's going to be helpful. And so that's one of the things too, if you come back to our website and whatnot, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, is we have a guide to a bunch of resources that you can use. So something I want to talk about next is just briefly touching upon what life looks like after high school, because that's still a transition process. And so this is an important turn. Like I was saying before, these individuals have graduated. There are new laws potentially that are protecting them, such as the ADA. And so it's important to realize this and plan a lot earlier in advance. Some things to consider is employers want to see that work experience. So again, that's things that can be worked on within that transition process, looking at skill identification, various trainings. How do you ask for accommodations and understand what an accommodation means? OVR, that's a very state-specific thing as well, but it's the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Vocational rehabilitation counselors that can help an individual prepare and maintain for employment. Depending on some states too, to be able to apply for some of these services, you have to wait for a couple of years after high school. However, though, it is within the law too that rehabilitation counselors, vocational rehabilitation counselors should be communicating with the schools as well. And so that's something that Michelle touched upon earlier, is reaching out to some of these community mental health departments or whatever it may be called at your state, because they will have connections with those agencies and with those individuals as well.
We're definitely in the trenches of it right now, and I am finding Sam actually has a waiver, and so his waiver is able to fund sort of the supports and services that we get either in home or out in the community. I would say one of the biggest things, and again, it probably changes state to state, but in Sam's case, we spent his whole life in school with his, team and IEP, and whether we were at home or in the community or at school, working on his skills or his independence or his learning. And with all of that, we continually used positive reinforcement, as most people do. And that's different things varying from, for Sam over the years. So now that we are, and one being his primary thing is that, he loves any kind of chip of every variety you could ever think of. And he's highly motivated by those, And so, for an example, if we're teaching independent toileting practices, when he has a success, we might use positive reinforcement. That was all fine and good until he turned 18. Once he became an adult, and certainly after he graduated, is when I saw it the most, when he was 21 and, out in the community or at home. As soon as those supports and services and he becomes, considered an adult at 21, we're no longer really allowed to do those types of things, because that is, I guess it's seen as him being an adult now. Again, it could just be Pennsylvania, but now he's seen as an adult. He has ownership over his person and the freedom to do what he wants. So that may be seen as, depriving him of chips when he wants chips. So that just was one of the biggest things I've seen. And, jumping off of what Ricky was saying, not that you won't continue to have those supports, but they will definitely be in a very different way. And the rules and laws sort of change, like with jobs or volunteering. I think one of the issues we faced was that when Sam is out in the community or the public, and if he has to use the restroom and he's with a female support staff, what do we do? Because she can't take him into the female bathroom, and he can't go into the male bathroom alone. So that was just, again, that was Sam. That was, one big thing, actually two big things. We really had to change our strategies on how to reinforce him, and, in his case with public bathrooms, and, what that would look like, how we could sort of adapt it. And, because Sam, he's, at that time was 21, and he has, every right to do what he wants to do. It's just that it sort of flips a little. We don't want to be seen as sort of violating his rights or his self-determination to do what he wants to do.
So now I want to go back in time a little bit and talk about why you should care about transition before the age of 14. Like we said before, this can be a very daunting thing. Michelle even said, why do I need to care about that far in advance? But I want to just enlighten on some of the reasons why maybe it would be important, and just start turning those gears and thinking about some of these things at an earlier age. So when you were a kid, what are you usually asked? Hopefully we came up with the same answer, but it's, what do you want to be when you're older? And this is very important because we're looking at people's likes and dislikes. And we talk about this with kids at a very early age to kind of figure out the path that they want to go down. So why not doing this with our individuals with disabilities as well? Now, this is a more higher level, but maybe if we take a step back and we think about what are some of the skills that they need to be independent, whether it be independent living skills, safety skills, self-management skills, advocacy and determination, relationship and social skills, leisure, transportation, getting from point A to point B, technology that they may need. I think it's important to think about that we're all getting older. And if we wait until the age of 16 to 18 to work on a lot of these skills, we're not preparing our students and we're not preparing our children to be able to be successful, independent, efficient adults when they're older. And so that's the biggest takeaway here, is that we shouldn't be waiting until the last minute to teach a lot of these skills. And sometimes we think, oh, it's fine, like we'll wait there, but it might take months or years to learn a lot of these very nuanced skills of social skills, how to read people's body language, how to be able to live independently and budget things and apply to jobs, and safety skills. That those are the things that are most important. And schools trying to prepare us to be efficient adults. And a lot of these we need that one-on-one attention on. And so I'm bringing this up right now just for you to think why it may be important to think about it at an earlier age. So now that we've talked about the transition process, we've talked a little bit about what happens after graduation, why we should think about transition earlier at an earlier age. I want to stop for a second and briefly go through 3 of the programs that we have as an organization that can help you out during this process. So if you head on over to our website and go under programs, so our first one is the educational programs. If you go here, you'll see the different webinars and workshops that we're putting together. You're watching one right now, and we have live ones, we have pre-recorded, and all over the gamut of transition services. For example, we have 3 that are coming up right now, all in October. So the first one on October 4th is how does this affect transition services? We also have a schedule building workshop, or thinking about healthy living and teaching those specific skills. So you can read a little bit about what our workshops and webinars are, when we're going to be providing them, and keep checking out and even contact us and sign up for our listserv so that you can keep coming to these and keep learning a lot about the transition process and how we can assist you. Another one of our programs is the resource guide, which is very relevant to what we've talked about today. It's a one-stop shop of all the resources that are out there for transition out of high school. As we know, as I'm sure you know, is that there are an abundance amount of resources that are out there, but they're not all in one place, and it's very hard to find them, and resources get lost. So we want to be that one-stop shop that takes all those resources, puts them into one entity to help you find what you need. So if you scroll on down, currently right now, we have all of our resources within the state of Pennsylvania and a little bit of Michigan, but we're planning on expanding, and the resources that we currently have are constantly expanding too, as new ones pop up, as old ones pop down. And so if you know of a resource that we don't have on here, please let us know. But to use our guide, you click on the left, and you can see that there are different categories. So you can either zoom into a specific location that you live to find what resources there are, or you can unclick the blimps that you don't want to see to get kind of closer to the exact needs and wants that you need. When you find one that you want, click on it, read a little bit about it, click on a new one, read a little bit about that as well, and take you to the website. Please contact us because we can help you look through the resource guide and find a specific resource that you may need as well. And last but not least, our one-to-one remote services, which also goes really hand in hand with what we talked about today, is we provide transition and vocational support online to you, your family members, the individuals going through the process, you name it, we're here. Here are some of the services that we can offer as well, whether it be vocational guidance, job training, money management, a lot of the skills that we just talked about, either before the age of 14, during that transition process, or even after as well, to kind of continue on with these skills. So if you scroll on down and you fill out this information, we'll contact you within 24 to 48 hours to set up a free consultation so that we can specifically design what you need, whether it be meeting with you once a week, twice a week, once a month, every other month, to help you through this process. We want to provide that support. So those are some of the resources that we have as the Next Step programs. So please reach out to us if you're interested in any of those, if you want to add some more resources to the list, if you have discussions and conversations that you want to have with us as well. Both of us just want to say thank you so much for joining us and for listening. And we hope that you were able to gain a lot of insight into transition a brief insight into transition. We hope that you come back to a lot of our other programs that we're putting on. Michelle and I are planning to take this presentation that you just watched and break it down very discreetly into the little nuances and go more into depth with them. And so we hope that you enjoy it.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you, and that if you want to contact either one of us via email, that would be fine. And, we'll try to help out in any way that we can. If not, maybe we can help you get to the right person or place in your community. But I also just want to say one quick thing if I can, and that is, I'm not professing to know everything by any means. And but I just want to say to the parents especially, try not to beat yourselves up. I mean, you're doing the best job that you can, and, you're the best advocate for your kids. So if you're building a team and you don't think someone is a great match for it or for your son or daughter, you do what you have to do to surround yourself with the people who have, the best information and the best sort of education to share with you, what is best for your son or daughter.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, everyone else.